Okay, we should be good to go. So summers at UUI are often a time when we return to the core values and stories of our tradition to reground ourselves, a kind of UU 101 to prepare us for the new church year. This summer has been no exception. And when you talk about our tradition, you're really talking about several traditions, of course, because Unitarian Universalism was formed by the coming together, two distinct, vital, creative, heretical, and by the mid-20th century, very small American religious traditions, Unitarianism and Universalism. It is sometimes said that our Unitarian tradition was characterized by the values of reason, freedom, and tolerance, and our Universalist side was characterized by the values of faith, hope, and love. In July, we looked at the Unitarian side, freedom, reason, and tolerance. And now in August, we will be looking at the Universalist side, faith, hope, and love. What did these words mean to our Universalist forebears, and what might they mean to Unitarian Universalism today? And this Sunday, we're starting with faith. Now, faith can be a tricky word for Unitarian Universalists. As Colleen pointed out in her reflection, faith is often taken to mean belief without reason or evidence, usually in the idea of God. In a religious context, the best belief is sometimes said to be unwavering belief. We are supposed to be strong in our faith, meaning we don't question the system of religious doctrine in which we are embedded, even when it confounds our reason or is mismatched by our life experience. This idea of faith, which some of you possibly grew up with, is precisely the thing that many come to Unitarian Universalism to get away from. And at its worst, this concept of faith, at its worst, can be abusive or destructive of the full development of the self. Now, there's no time when this was the meaning of the word faith for either our Unitarian or our Universalist ancestors, who were Christian and who did believe in God, and who also left plenty of room for questioning, reasoning, and disagreeing. Both Unitarianism and Universalism are strong freedom of thought traditions which expected people to apply critical reason and their own experience as acid tests to any statement of religious belief. Unwavering, unreasoning belief in doctrine is not what Unitarian Universalists mean when we talk about faith today. And I hasten to add, we're not unique in this regard. Unitarian Universalists, because we are justly proud of our own free thought tradition, are sometimes unaware that doubt and questioning is embraced in healthy and compassionate ways in many other religious traditions. Colleen gave us an example of that from her own experience. Even those at the end of the day have creeds and have official statements of doctrine, right? We are not remotely unique in being a critical religious tradition. We are just at one end of a spectrum, at the far end of that spectrum, as a matter of fact. Now, faith has a second meaning, as Colleen also pointed out, which is complete trust and confidence in someone or something. We operate out of this kind of faith all the time, whether we like it or not. Life requires decisions and action, and the information we have available to us is always partial, always. And so life requires trust. And as Colleen also pointed out, there can be a lot of tension and ambiguity in our experience of this kind of faith. We trust our own judgment, even though we know that we are sometimes wrong. We trust our doctors, but hopefully we ask lots of questions and get a second opinion for the big things. We trust our system of government, though it fails us regularly. We trust in science, though error and discovery is built right into the method. Do we ever have complete trust and confidence in the people closest to us, perhaps in a handful of things, and yet we regularly stake our fortunes and our lives on fallible people and contingent truths, which is a kind of faith? Now, fundamentalists and postmodernists alike sometimes seek to conflate these two concepts of faith and say that all beliefs are a form of faith. So whether you believe in evolution or you believe the earth is 6,000 years old, it's all just a form of faith. But these are two very different uses of the word faith, and we should not get the two confused. Now, I want to point us to a third meaning of the word faith, this one introduced by James Fowler. And this is taken from the textbook Human Faith and Development by Dr. Felicity Kelcourse. Fowler said that faith is a personal response to the question, on what or whom do you set your heart? On what or whom do you set your heart? This concept of faith is more fundamental than a belief in this or that doctrine. It is an existential experience of trust and commitment that grounds and organizes our lives in a way that allows us to create and experience meaning. In this context, everyone can be said to experience faith, regardless of whether we believe in God. It is not about God, per se. It is about the fundamental commitments that orient us and move us. So this could be a faith grounded in our experience of and hope for beauty, or love, or compassion, or human goodness, or in our experience of something we call divine. On what have you set your heart? How do you know? Clarence Skinner, probably the most important Universalist writer and theologian of the 20th century, wrote about this question at the end of a long career in ministry and teaching. Skinner was a Universalist pastor and also a professor at Tufts University, which was founded by the Universalist Church, incidentally. Skinner brought humanism into Universalism. Universalism started out as a Bible-based Christian religion that had the radical notion that if God was love, then hell was an impossibility, because no loving God would send anyone to hell. In the end, the Universalists said, everyone is restored to the embrace of love. That was our radical idea. If God is love, then in the end, everyone is returned to love. Now, this is a powerful and liberating idea for anyone who has grown up under the oppressive threat of hellfire and damnation. And Universalism spread like wildfire across America in the early years of our country. It was good news gladly received. And the good news spread so rapidly because those early Universalists had faith in its power. They set their whole hearts on this idea that God is love. And so those early Universalist preachers would just jump on a horse, gallop to the next town over, preach their message that God is love, wherever they could assemble a crowd, and then bam, there was another Universalist church. Faith moved to action is our Universalist tradition. It is part of our heritage. So by the 1840s, there were 55 Universalist churches here in Indiana. There were 0 Unitarian churches in Indiana, by way of contrast. And over the course of the 19th century, there may have been 100 Universalist churches in the state of Indiana. I can find mention of 2 Unitarian churches, neither of which survived. The Universalists were on fire with an idea that they found life-giving and life-saving, and they were determined to share it. They had set their hearts on it. By the mid-1800s, the Universalists claimed to be the 6th largest denomination in America. Now, who knows what the real numbers were? Universalist mathematics could be, shall we say, aspirational. But it was definitely a period of remarkable growth for the denomination. But by the early 20th century, the Universalists were almost a victim of their own success, because most Protestant religions, the competition, had stopped talking a lot about hell by then. Hell didn't have a lot of hold on the popular imagination at the turn of the 20th century. It had lost its power to terrorize. And so Universalism as a religious movement predicated on the idea that there was no hell was kind of looking for a reason to be, and it was rapidly declining. Now into this void stepped Clarence Skinner, and in his work he reimagined Universalism as a humanistic religion directed towards establishing the kingdom of heaven on earth through basically science and socialism. It wasn't anymore about God's love after death. It was about love transforming the world here and now. And this vision breathed new life into Universalism, and it gave the movement energy and direction. In his last book, Worship and the Well-Ordered Life, Skinner wrote about faith as a conviction that compels us to act, because we have our heart set on something and we believe that that something could actually be. Faith is when we believe in the possibility of our own vision to such an extent that we are moved to act. Faith, he wrote, tries wings, follows illusions, challenges, urges, fails, conquers. Faith is an expression of unconfined zeal of spirit. It is more than an assurance of things unseen. It is an adventure after them. Faith, he says, is for unsurrendered persons. Faith is for unsurrendered persons. For Skinner, writing with his early 20th century understanding of universalism, the unseen thing that he is referring to was not heaven. It was a world without war and poverty. Skinner had lived through both world wars and the Great Depression, but he was unsurrendered in his conviction that love was more powerful than hate. Today, writing in the context of late-stage capitalism and looming ecological collapse, we might lift up a world healed from an environmental devastation, a world in which the oceans are thriving instead of choking with plastic, a world in which resources are shared more equitably, basic needs are secured, and everyone has the possibility for a healthy life. A world in which human communities live in harmony with each other and with nature. This might be our thing unseen. The great Wendell Berry once wrote of such a vision of a healed earth, "This is no paradisal dream. Its hardship is its possibility." Do we believe in such a vision? Can we set our heart on it? There's the amazing story of Dashrath Maji, the mountain man of India. Dashrath Maji was a coal miner in the remote village of Galore, India, who lived from 1929 to 2007. Galore is located in mountainous terrain, which is where impassable hills often isolate communities from each other, and villagers are sometimes forced to travel miles out of their way around a hill to access services. Well, one day when Dashrath was a young man, his wife was injured in an accident, and because there was no easy access to the nearest hospital, she did not receive care in time, and she died. And Dashrath decided that no one else should suffer the same fate. So he resolved to improve the village's access to the nearby hospital, and he did that by carving an access road through the mountain using nothing but his hammer and chisel. When he was finished, the road was 360 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 25 foot deep. It took him 22 years. He labored on the road from 1960 to 1982. But Dashrath Maji's road cut the distance to the hospital from 55 kilometers to 15 kilometers. And now everyone in the village has better access to health care. Maji had a vision born out of love and empathy, love for his wife, empathy that no one should suffer as she suffered, as he suffered. It was a good vision, and all he had to do to achieve that vision was cut through a mountain and build a road from here to there, and what he had to work with to cut through that mountain was his own hands and a hammer and a chisel. And perhaps, unfortunately for him, he knew it could be done. He knew he could do it. Its hardship was its possibility. It would be easy to say, yes, a shortcut would be a good thing. We're in total agreement with you there, but, well, there is the mountain. So, in Skinner's language, Maji had faith in the unbuilt road, the thing unseen, faith that caused him to venture after it. And the hard thing was not that he wanted the road or even that he believed in the idea of the road. The hard thing was that he had faith that the road could be. Faith enough to set his whole heart on it. Faith enough to carve through a mountain. So that's one kind of faith. Faith that begins with the conviction that a better world is possible. Faith which is animated by confidence in our own power and persistence. This is, in a sense, a humanist kind of faith, a faith in knowledge, strength, purposeful action, a faith grounded in the power of the human spirit. This is a faith that says things happen when we make them happen. Well, here's another kind of faith. Author Rachel Naomi Raymond, writing about healing in the book Kitchen Table Wisdom, says that no gardener ever grows a rose. When its needs are met, a rose bush grows a rose. Gardeners do not cause, they encourage. The force which actually grows roses is a self-contained power within the rose itself. These are the unseen forces that sustain our lives, that make life itself possible. The gardeners may be quite skillful, but what they ultimately have faith in is not in their own powers, but in the power of the rose itself, in the power of the soil and sunlight, and in the power that impels living things to grow. This is a different kind of faith, a more humble faith, perhaps, that recognizes that we may not get to the world we dream of by cutting through all obstacles like cutting through a mountain. It is a faith of tending, coaxing, encouraging, arranging. It is a faith that in the end, there are subtler forces at work in the world, forces that are not us. The poet Marge Piercy wrote a poem, The Seven of Pentacles, about this different kind of faith. She wrote, "Under a sky the color of pea soup, she is looking at her work growing away there, actively, thickly, like grapevines or pole beans, as things grow in the real world, slowly enough. If you tend them properly, if you mulch, if you water, if you provide birds that eat insects a home and winter food, if the sun shines and you pick off caterpillars, if the praying mantis comes and the ladybugs and the bees, then the plants flourish, but at their own internal clock." This is a faith in human powers and something much greater than human powers. It is a faith in the energies of life itself, in the vast interdependent web of which we are only the smallest part. If we do not have a faith that can carve through mountains, there's another kind of faith that is just as sorely needed, maybe more needed, the faith of coaxing, arranging, tending, trusting. Remember, the gardener does not create the rose. The rose creates the rose in its own good time. Connections are made slowly, Piercy writes. Sometimes they grow underground. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. And so, she says, penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. After the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. Do we have a faith that can carve through a mountain? Do we have a faith that can reach out and keep reaching out through the long season of tending and growth? Do we have a faith that will carry a child in the rain, though the rain will never stop falling? Do we have a faith that will wrap its arms around a tree until the forest has been saved? Do we have a faith whose hardship is its possibility? On what have you set your heart? So much now depends on your answer. Blessed be, and amen. Our closing hymn today is Blue Boat Home.